Hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk Ray Bradbury, my long-running Ray Bradbury short fiction review show. Before we get into today's review, I need to do a bit of housekeeping. The other day, I released a review for a story called Time Intervening, and immediately, somebody in the comment section, thank you, pointed out to me that I'd already reviewed that story way back in 2020. And so, of course, I deleted it in favor of the original version. That's increasingly becoming a problem here. I'm attempting to read and review each of the roughly 600 short stories that Ray Bradbury wrote and published in his lifetime, but there is no clear list of what all those titles might be, and he has a weird publishing history involving a lot of stories that were revised and republished under different names. And then, of course, there's just the whole thing that I've been doing this since 2018, so it's becoming increasingly hard to sort of keep track of not just the stories themselves, but also the titles that belong to those stories. So forgive me for that. We're going to move on today, and hopefully I have not read or reviewed this story before. I'm pretty sure that I haven't. Today's story is The Enemy in the Wheat, is the 19th of 25 short stories in his collection from 2002, One More for the Road. It is also the 278th episode of this show. If you're new to the show, the way that this works is I do a brief synopsis of what happens in the story, all the plot, action, character, and then I wrap up with just a very brief, light analysis of what it all means. And I mainly do this just for my own entertainment, my own enrichment, but on occasion, one of you will chime in and say, yeah, that helped me out a little bit, and I like that too, so... Okay, synopsis. Two nations have been at war for many years, but that war is finally coming to an end. And then one night in a farmhouse, the farmer and his family are sleeping, and they hear a whistling overhead and then a loud thump as something lands apparently in their wheat field, but does not explode. The father gets up, the wife, the kids, they all sort of go out of the house, and the father immediately begins searching in the dark, trying to find what he believes to be a massive unexploded bomb. He searches through the night, he can't find it, and the next day the search continues. He's very cautious. He insists that his family, leave the area, please go to town. They refuse to do that. He asks them to stay in the house. They don't do that. They're not taking this nearly as seriously as he does. All the while, he becomes more and more frantic with his searches, and he's drinking a lot of wine, apparently, as well. But also, in the meantime, his neighbors, having heard the sound and also seeing him out there trampling his own wheat, they begin to take notice, and they're sort of watching, and they're all talking, where could this bomb be? And this goes on for 4 or 5 days. And then finally, one morning, the bomb blows up, and it's not a very big sound, and it's not where they thought it would be. It wasn't in the wheat field at all. It was sort of like 40 or 50 yards outside of his property, down in some empty creek bed, and it wasn't really a big deal. And so it seems like the crisis should be over. However, the father, he's not willing to admit that. He insists that there must be a bigger bomb, and it was so heavy that it was buried in my wheat field, and then eventually one day it's going to explode. It's going to haunt my family for the rest of the century. As the story ends, years later, he is found drinking wine in the village, in a tavern, talking to anybody or nobody who will listen. And he says, have I ever told you about the bomb in my wheat field? And, of course, at this point, it's become all a tall tale. And there's just some little addendum about, his son, now grown up, writing letters to him occasionally and sort of signing them off with the word boom at the end. But the bomb, apparently, for him, is still very much a clear and present danger in his alcohol-addled brain. Okay, so this story is obviously a comedy of sorts, but not really the funny kind so much, though there are a few chuckles that I got out of the whole operation. It's more of a light satire, and for a satire, it's not a very precise one. It covers or suggests a number of themes that I found to be interesting. The first is that the way that we generate tall tales based on events in our life, and then those events sort of grow with the telling. This is very much a tall tale for this man. Very much like that stereotypical story about the one that got away, the fish that you nearly caught, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger with every retelling. That's the case with him in this bomb. This bomb has gotten bigger and bigger in his mind over the years. But there's also the idea that the very real and scary idea that wars kill a lot of people, but they also continue to kill people long after the war has ended, with unexploded ordnance being inadvertently disturbed by construction projects, and occasionally mines being stepped on by farmers in their fields and children at play long after the ends of the wars. So the killing goes on, and that's very much a present theme throughout this story. I think there's also perhaps, and this one's a little bit more subtle, a sense of survivor's guilt and perhaps guilt of not having served in the war. At times the story mentions how the war was always sort of over there. It was close, it was bad, it was a nuisance, but the closest it ever came to them was, sort of flashes of light on the horizon at night as guns went off and things like that. So I think that perhaps this man may have been feeling some sort of guilt of not having his farm ruined by the war, while other people's farms were in fact burnt out by bombs. And then finally, I think there's a theme of alcoholism that's sort of woven throughout the story, and how this man, as the stress ramps up of his concern over this bomb, he drinks more and more. His story then grows with the drinking, with the alcoholism, and finally, at the end of the story, he's apparently driven everyone away, and there he is alone in the bar, drinking, talking to himself, still telling the same old stories, unable to move on from his past. Probably as much because of his drinking habit as from the actual worry of the threat. There it is, the enemy in the wheat, rather. The 19th of 25 short stories in One More for the Road as we quickly approach the end of this collection. And hopefully there's no more repeat stories in this collection. I work very hard to sort of find volumes to read from where I haven't read any of the stories yet. And occasionally maybe there's one or two that I get to skip because I already have, but then it becomes harder and harder to remember which ones those are. But we're going to do this. There is no precise list of all these stories written by Ray Bradbury. There's a few that get close, but even if you look at them, you realize there's some discrepancies between the two. So who knows how many stories he actually wrote. It's somewhere near 600, and I'm going to read them all. Next time, we'll be looking at a story called Four, apparently about golf, and that will be story number 279 here on Let's Talk Ray Bradbury. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. See you later.